Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Global Power Dynamic podcast. In today's conversation, we are going to talk about the Indo-Pacific region. But before we go to the details, let's begin with the terms, the concept of the Indo-Pacific region. When first time this concept is emerged, the terms of the Indo-Pacific is an old concept going back to 1920. And the first time coined and conceptualized by the German geographicians Karl Hauswell in 1920s. Though his vision differed significantly from the terms of contemporary usage, Hauswell, recognizing the demographic and economic importance of the region, imagined an Indo-Pacific region where Japan, China, and India, liberated from the colonial domination and would align themselves with Germany in a struggle against the United States, United Kingdom, and Western Europe. The modern interpretation of this concept of the Indo-Pacific term first time emerged in a 2007 speech delivered by Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to the Indian Parliament. His speech was titled "The Confluence of the Two Seas." Abe described a partnership through which Japanese influence in the Pacific Ocean and Indian influence in the Indian Ocean, in partnership with the United States and Australia, that could skew shipping routes and promote freedom and prosperity in the region. And shortly after Abe described these terms of Indo-Pacific in Indian Parliament, the term became commonplace in foreign policy discussion within the quadrilateral security dialogue, or the Quad, of informal security grouping of Australia, Japan, and the United States as for like-minded democracies in the region. In 2019, the United States published a policy document formalizing the shared vision of a free and Indo-Pacific, an umbrella term to describe the policy goals of the United States and its allies in the region. In 2020, the Biden administration unveiled the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, a trade invitation initially comprising the US and 12 allies. Following the United States' lead, numerous American allies have published strategic documents outlining their policies toward the Indo-Pacific region. And in Indo-Pacific region also there is a nuclear issues and deterrence issues. Following this, the Quad also another new emerged deterrence frameworks emerged in the region. To understand all this, the complex dynamics of the region and the deterrence issues and the US-led alliance system in the region, I'm joined by Natalia Traylor. Natalia is a senior fellow at the Indo-Pacific Studies Center, IPCS, a senior analyst at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, and the Australian company director of Alpha India Consultancy. Natalia is working on matters of geopolitics and strategic alliances to achieve deterrence in Indo-Pacific region. She enjoys working collaboratively with policymakers, diplomats, scholars, and emerging leaders across the Indo-Pacific and globally to realize these ends. Natalia holds a Master of Strategic Studies and a Master of Business Administration from the Australian National University, and a Master of Engineering Management and a Bachelor of Science, Applied Chemistry from the University of Technology of Sydney. Welcome, Natalia, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Dr. Luckman. It's great to be here with you.
Yes, Natalia, I try to briefly introduce the terms of Indo-Pacific region, and also we have US allies system, US, France, like-minded countries in the region. And there is another issues of deterrence. I think in 2012, Obama administration announced its pivot to Asia. And then the United States, numerous, I think, attempts by the United States initiated new strategies, new frameworks, revisiting its national security strategy. And all these things, I think, mainly due to the rising of China. China first rising in the region as economic power, military power, and also has a giant population. And China has also some disputes with its neighbors in the South China Sea, like the Philippines, Vietnams, and also has some disputes over the Senkaku Diao Islands with Japan. And also the China's growing importance on the region, especially on the South China Sea, and the critical choke points of the maritime trade based on several estimators. I think annually more than $5 trillion US trade flows to this region. And now, after economic growth and increasing in China's military power projection capability, PLA and PLA Navy, some US allies, like-minded countries, try to revisit their deterrence strategy. And one of them is Australia. Recently signed the agreement of AUKUS with the United States and United Kingdom. And based on all this historical background and the developments, from your view in Australia, how will you describe these dynamics in the Pacific region? And what are the challenges facing the United States-led order, especially in Asia and Pacific region?
Yeah, so currently we face an increasingly nuclear-armed multipolar Asia, and I'll go into detail in that in a little while. The current Indo-Pacific deterrence frameworks are dependent upon bilateral US extended nuclear deterrence agreements. There's no collective security agreements. And there's some different views on this, whether or not we need an alliance with nuclear alliance, essentially, with nuclear weapons, or do we just need conventional weapons and US extended nuclear deterrence? The current views are very centered on the Taiwan scenario, but they also need to consider the role of the Indo-Pacific deterrence frameworks in the context of what I'd call the 5-theater or the multi-theater problem. So I'll give those two an acronym. I've given it either the 5T or the MT problem. Let's take your pick on acronyms there. But we face challenges on those fronts, and we need to think about those things. So some of the challenges that we face in the region include, I've got some notes here that I just want to refer to as well. Sorry, I'm just flicking to my notes. So current challenges in this increasingly nuclear-armed multipolar Asia, we face China's rapid expansion and modernization of its nuclear weapons, which is shifting the global and regional strategic balance. It's moving the world from a bipolar US-Russia dynamic to a more complex and potentially less stable tripolar nuclear environment. China's nuclear arsenal will impact the strategic postures of nuclear-armed and non-nuclear-armed states regionally and globally. We also need to consider that the CRINC countries, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, are actively working to create a multipolar world order through expansion of their military and security and economic cooperation. The US nuclear arsenal is aging and in smaller numbers as the modernization and replacement of all three legs of the triad was long delayed. And this is where it sort of presents the risk of a 5-theater or a multi-theater problem, where we could have nuclear confrontation on multiple fronts. The other factors to consider in these deterrence dynamics include complex relations between China, India, Russia, and Pakistan, because they're generating these new strategic partnerships and rivalries, and also shifting the global order. We have a rising India in the region as well, who wants to achieve superpower status, and what China's sort of nuclear weapons program will mean for India is also a consideration, plus other nuclear powers, even sort of Pakistan and India as well, and the US. And then we have the emergence of new actors in the Indian Ocean region. So at the moment, the Indo-Pacific strategy sort of focused on the Asia-Pacific, sort of like the Pacific, West Pacific side of the house, and not so much the Indian Ocean region. But in the Indian Ocean region, we've got China, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and Russia, and they're sort of shifting the global nuclear order in that region as well. So we've got Pakistan, where it's committed to extend its nuclear deterrent umbrella to Saudi Arabia. And we've also had gaps in US multilateral frameworks, which are leading to the formation of these regional frameworks. So, for example, when when Trump said he may pull out of NATO, we had France and the UK quickly offer a nuclear umbrella for Europe, and then we've seen sort of them looking at them developing their weapons as well, so increasing their nuclear weapons capability as well.
What is the current problem with existing multilateral frameworks? So are these bilateral deterrence frameworks enough to deter in these 5 theaters, or multiple theater problem?
So currently the Indo-Pacific frameworks do not have collective security arrangements. They depend on these bilateral US extended nuclear deterrence agreements. So that's between the US and Japan, the US and Australia, and the US and South Korea. There used to be a nuclear agreement with the Philippines, but that pulled out due to their treaty obligations as well. That's my understanding. And the current frameworks that exist, so the Quad came together originally after the, don't quote me on the date, but the tsunami that happened in Indonesia. And it was more of it was to support, it came together to support that effort, but then its primary goal now is to support a free and open and stable, prosperous Indo-Pacific region. Its main focus is on enhancing maritime domain awareness, ensuring resilient and diversified supply chains for critical goods like semiconductors, critical minerals, clean energy, communications, and space-based Earth observation data for climate and disaster management. It supports infrastructure projects like undersea cable connectivity and resilient port infrastructure. It provides health security and coordinating rapid responses to natural disasters. So it's trying to sort of provide an alternative to China's Belt and Road as well. But it's trying to not force people down that route. It's saying, you know, it's here if you want it, and we'll provide that for you. It lacks, the Commander Indo-PACOM came out, I think it was in March earlier this year, and basically said these deterrence frameworks lack, they lack the military side of it, so they lack the collective security that's needed in order to deter. And then we have the Trilateral Security Dialogue, which is a security cooperation framework between the United States, Japan, and Australia. It's also designed to coordinate policy and cooperation on regional security issues. It's a core component of the broader US alliance network and Indo-Pacific security architecture. It complements the other initiatives like the Quad and AUKUS, and it's also focused on maritime security, but it also has a focus on counterterrorism and response actions that affect regional stability. And it looks a bit more at building that interoperability through joint military training exercises. And it's got that sort of element of the AUKUS in it in terms of collaborating on development of new technologies as well. We then have AUKUS, which it's a trilateral security partnership between Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States. It focuses on deepening defence and security cooperation. It was a response to China's growing military presence and assertive actions in the South China Sea. And there will be rotational forces out of Western Australia, which we've already seen benefits of this, for example, in the Indo-Pacific. So when China circumnavigated Australia, a few days later, one of the US submarines turned up in HMAS Sterling. So we can see the benefits of having that deterrence aspect there already from AUKUS. I'd say we're probably going to need to leverage on that a lot harder in future. And then we've got the advanced capabilities, which is the trilateral collaboration in developing the advanced military capabilities. And I've talked about that in an article about how we could utilise that for sort of Golden Dome activities, which is missile defense. But I would also say that missile defense, because most people say, oh, it's a defense. And I'm like, yes, but defense has offensive actions as well. So when you say an interceptor, you may you could almost change that out with a strike capability as well. But yeah, they lack that. They don't have a nuclear deterrence component to it. We don't have collective security and the bilateral arrangements. So how that would, those arrangements would respond to a particular crisis, and I'm not just talking a Taiwan crisis, so as we see China build up its nuclear weapons and it becomes more coercive, what does that look like?
So Natalia, how are the views of the US allies and partners changing with respect to the individual or collective security needs? For example, do US allies and partners want or think they need nuclear weapons to deter large-scale nuclear or conventional attacks? How do you see the situation now?
So we're seeing this change almost on in real time. We've currently seen this with Japan and the new Japanese Prime Minister. So Japan is currently not hosting nuclear weapons, but its government's actively discussing a major security policy shift that would allow it to do so in future. So it's looking at the potential revision of its long-standing 3 non-nuclear principles, which to permit the hosting of US nuclear weapons under a NATO-style nuclear sharing arrangement. South Korea is not currently pursuing the acquisition of its own nuclear weapons, and it remains committed to the NPT. However, an intense public and political debate is ongoing regarding the need for a domestic nuclear deterrent or the hosting of US nuclear weapons, which this discussion sort of been fueled by North Korea's advancing nuclear capabilities and concerns over the reliability of extended nuclear deterrence. But we have seen also, I haven't been keeping a close eye on this, but my understanding or my read of post sort of the 12-day war and strikes on Iran, we have seen North Korea sort of quieten down a bit, but I haven't been keeping an active watch on that, so maybe I've missed it. And then we've got the Philippines, which effectively relies on the US for its external defense, including the broader policy of extended deterrence. But it's traditionally focused on conventional forces rather than a specific nuclear sort of arrangement, and yeah, there's a bit of debate there as to whether or not that arrangement still exists from a long time ago.
And also beyond the deterrence framework, I think we can say there is arms race also happening in the region. For example, Filipinos buying some BrahMos to protect its Coast Guard from India, and on the other hand, in Northeast Asia, the US allies, South Korea also try to revisit their nuclear strategy due to the mainly growing threats coming from North Korea and this threat perception.
Yes.
All these things, I think, mainly not because of China, maybe also because of the North Korea's growing nuclear arsenal in quantity and also in quality.
Yes.
All these things push the regional countries to make or come together for new deterrence frameworks. And Japan also, I think, is amazing example in that case. For example, and the post-war Japan's maritime or self-defense forces just as a defensive army, and now Japan also tried to modernize military and buying some, in maritime or long-range missile in land and maritime to protect its border. Yes, all these things make it the region more complex, I think. In this regard, little bit going forward, how should States allies and partners approach this problem. I mean problem, this is a growing threat. The US and its allies in the region, they have threat perceptions, mainly from China and North Korea, but it's not limited to China and North Korea. I think that the US and its allies fears this is the combination of the country. I just also published an article about the nuclear triangle, like the United China, North Korea, and Russia coming together, and they pose a significant threat to the US and its allies in the region. There is a three nuclear armed forces, and all these countries binding with some formal agreements. Also, China, like China and North Korea, friendship agreement back to 1960. And there was another friendship agreement between the North Korea and Russia, but it was dissolved after the disintegration of the Soviet Union. But they renewed again. They renewed later. I think last year they renewed new agreement and increasing the cooperation between the arms trade between Russia and North Korea, and also we can extend all these threat perception from East Asia, from Indo-Pacific to the Middle East. Also, there is the Iran-Israel war. Iran tried to reach a nuclear power states, and the Israel also has a nuclear power in the region. All this combination of these threats, they push US and its allies to make a new frameworks, strategic frameworks, or deterrent frameworks. On the other hand, the traditional US allies, especially like the United States and Japan, they try to, which are under the US security umbrella, they believe that the extent deterrence are eroding due to the increasing of number or quality in the PLA's nuclear weapons. All these things, while pushing the US and its allies, also I think making the US adversaries like China, Russia, and North Korea more together. So how do you see this dramatic change will create a nuclear alliance, or only a conventional armed defense pact will be enough for the US allies in the region? And what are the challenges before this emerging deterrence from frameworks?
So my personal view is that a defense pact will not be enough. It will need to be a nuclear alliance of some sorts. I think we should be thinking of a longer term issue as well in terms of China's nuclear build-up, and what does that look like once it sort of gets to 1500 by 2035, not just a Taiwan scenario, and how the build-up of those forces will affect the region. And like you're saying, where we can see sort of the CRINC countries sort of coming together and working more coherently. I think one of the main concerns is whether or not they'd sort of divide and conquer the theatres, and that's where I talk about this 5 theatre problem, or this multi-theatre MT and 5T sort of problem, sort of in contrast to one of Brad Roberts's sort of 2P problem, where he talks about the 2 nuclear problem, because it's more than that. It could be potentially involving more theatres, it could be involving more actors, but then also how do we leverage the relationships of those key parties as well. So I think we still need to build the conventional forces of multilateral security frameworks, but we need to ensure that they're backed by extended nuclear deterrence. And because I think we are seeing that the conventional force build up. So I know that you're saying, like, is this an arms race? I think countries have had to build their conventional forces up in order to provide rungs on that escalation ladder that weren't there originally. I probably wasn't as appreciative of conventional weapons in the first place. I'm like, I'm one of probably like the person that Microsoft, Bill Gates would have hired was, what's the quickest solution? And I would have gone, well, just throw a nuke at them. But I can see the benefits now of having those conventional forces. But also we've seen even, like, for example, in Israel, where they basically took down all of the obstacles in the way in order to get those forces in there as well. So you can see that if you do want to, where you do need to either get nuclear forces through or just even conventional forces, the advantage of having those offensive weapons as well as the defensive ones, the intercept ones, like in order to prevent, say, some incoming missiles as well. I don't think that we'll be able to stop ICBMs, but maybe. I think the best way to stop an ICBM, though, so I'm probably using deterrence. And I think we need to address the gaps in the Indo-Pacific security frameworks where we don't have these collective defence arrangements that are backed by extended nuclear deterrence guarantees. We need to probably leverage the US-UK rotational submarine forces more for deterrence options. For example, like having the Slickmans on the USS Virginias, the US Virginia-class submarines, and having them rotate out of Australia. People will probably be up in arms about the treaty, and that's for someone else to figure out, not me. And then we need to also look at, under what conditions would nuclear proliferation among US allies be stabilising and necessary to deter threats in multiple theatres as well. And we should also look at where the weaknesses exist in US-led bilateral and multilateral security frameworks and complement them through these regionally led multilateral extended nuclear deterrence frameworks. So, for example, like where you're seeing Pakistan and Saudi Arabia come together, or France and the UK. So we're going to provide that umbrella over NATO as well, sort of bolstering those deterrence frameworks. And then we can also identify areas where these complex relationships exist between states that could contribute to stability and be leveraged to deter specific threats. Because we've seen this play out in the Pakistan, India conflicts as well, where they leverage Russia and China, even the US, to deter the other side from escalation as well. And then also we need to look at building in confidence measures. So because basically arms control and non-proliferation is just very unlikely to happen, how do you build in confidence building measures to increase transparency and reduce the risks of misunderstanding or miscalculation and prevent the escalation? I think we've got a better chance in that. And India and Pakistan have done that to an extent. And that was very prevalent in the Cold War. How likely that is, I'm not sure, but it's probably more likely than trying to get to zero.
And from here, Natalia, I want to make a point. The geographical space also is a broader geographical space. Indo-Pacific, I mean, is broader than the Asia-Pacific. Previously, when people or decision maker focusing on I think it's easier to focusing on the Asia-Pacific geographical space because just combination of the Asia land side and the Pacific Ocean, and inside the Pacific Ocean, just a teeny Pacific countries, they mainly don't have the strong army, or they don't have a nuclear weapons even. But now when you put it the another geographical space like Indo-Pacific on the table, it will include another, like South Asia. South Asia also a fragile nuclear and volatile region, which Pakistan and India has both has nuclear weapons. On the other hand, also the east coast of Africa also include to this the geographical space, Australia, and they make it more broader, and I think increase the burden of the decision makers, especially the US, since it is the owner of the term, or the modern owner of the term in terms of the strategy or the security. As this make it more difficult for states to thinking own or creating a new strategy like the especially when we come to deterrence framework. Framework is more difficult when you are more exposed to the nuclear environment, like now South Korea and Japan, they face a growing threats from the North Korea and China. On other hand, as I said, the Pakistan and India both has nuclear weapons. All these
that's why I wore my F-35 pin.
yeah.
F-35 for Turkey, right?
Oh yes, F-35. Yeah, F-35 also I think is a strong part of the deterrence, but not like not as much as power as the nuclear weapons.
Well, you could put them the B-61s on them, and maybe some long-range standoff ones. But that's the point. I think we need to be thinking about some of those regionally led frameworks in different areas to be looking at those additional threats, and not necessarily the India-Pakistan, but that bigger balance between the nuclear powers themselves. Because I think that's where we may be able to create some stability there as well. There is, when you look at the Sino-Russo border conflict, I thought it was originally just that China, because China was able to deter a nuclear strike based on its significantly large conventional forces, but in reality, it was a young nuclear weapons power. So it still had the threat of nuclear weapons. And Russia, I was listening to Sarah Payne, Russia approached the US to say, well, can we nuke the Chinese? And the US was like, no. And then the US went and met with China and Russia. So then how do you sort of, you need to, currently the US sort of frameworks are very focused on one problem. So you've got NATO and it focuses on Russia. You've got the Indo-Pacific and it focuses on sort of China and then North Korea from Japan sort of way. And then you don't really have anything around the India-Pakistan thing. And then you've got sort of the JCPOA, which is no longer. And then we also sort of had Israel and its relationship sort of guaranteeing the security of that region. But now as we see sort of Saudi Arabia and other countries, even including Turkey, what are their roles in those sort of regionally led frameworks? And that's where I'm thinking of this multi-theatre sort of problem, and why I'd probably think now may be a time that Trump will maybe need to reconsider his decision on the F-35. I know it's controversial, but potentially that's an option that needs to be put on the table.
Yes, that's also interesting point. I just want to mention that its links or relations with the geographical space. That's why I was talking about the India and Pakistan included, because both states are nuclear armed countries, and on the Northeast Asia, China and North Korea also. And that's why I think the Australia also moving forward to sign the AUKUS agreement to buying nuclear powered submarines. All these things that push the countries, and maybe we don't know next Southeast Asian or East Asian countries will be which one, to Japan or other countries to acquire nuclear weapons, or all these developments also, making a big public debates in South Korea. In South Korea, many observers, peoples, and high-ranking decision makers, they believe that they have their own traditional indigenous nuclear weapons. They believe that some have argument. They strongly believe that the U.S. extended deterrence no longer are able to deter the threats, not conventional. I mean, nuclear threats coming from the Russia and China. All this, the development of the silos of the nuclear armed states, they push their neighbors or regional countries to working on new emergent deterrence frameworks, like you discussed with us. And from here, Natalie, what should we invite or on the next as this show, or what kind of topic or people we can further broaden our discussion on deterrence frameworks? What will be your take on?
I think it would be good to speak to a person called David Phillips, who's working on he was primarily working on the deterrence in North Korea, but I think he's expanded that now to a more broader Indo-Pacific deterrence concept. There's Eli Ratner, who's working on that Defence Pacific Pact, and how do we convince him that we need a little bit more than just conventional deterrence, and then potentially even Kurt Campbell, because he's the one that's been trying to stitch together Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic, but he's probably thinking about how East Asia, Central Asia and the Middle East all fits into this sort of 5-theatre, multiple theatre sort of problem, and what are those deterrence requirements. And yeah, I have to keep my eyes open to see who else.
As deterrence researchers, how do you see that the future gaps, especially the some topics that the decision makers maybe they couldn't detect in terms of deterrence and the growing nuclear threats, and in terms of nuclear proliferations? What kind of topic you think that it will be more interesting in the future?
I think from an Australian view, and this is maybe something that I'll focus on as well, is why maybe Australia should host at least nuclear weapons and support the slicker men on the US Virginia's class submarines. Whether or not we get them onto the future ones that Australia has is a question. I have written an article about that. I propose 3 options: that either the US maintains extended nuclear deterrence for Australia, or they look at those sharing arrangements, and I called that the dual capable submarine, so a DCS mission rather than a dual capable aircraft, DCA mission, for that under a NATO-like sort of arrangement. And where we need to go and thinking about that, the bigger problem beyond a Taiwan scenario. I think we do need to consider how to deter that, but looking at how will China's growing nuclear weapons affect the region, and also how we're going to have a rising India. They're very keen on being a superpower. I don't know whether or not that will play into their nuclear weapons. I don't think they're that keen to be a huge nuclear weapons power, but I do think that we know that they've had a slight increase in their nuclear weapons from 170 to 180 last year. But the region that they live in will determine their nuclear posture going forward, and I think we'll see how that plays out. But we need to be thinking about that as well. And then what's the impact on Pakistan, for example, as well? Like, how do they feel about this thing? And yeah, we need to really look a bit more sort of comprehensively at deterrence in terms of not just a specific actor or state, sort of looking at the problem a bit more holistically as well, but then having that tailored deterrence, and then what are the mechanisms that you might use, whether that be, like I've said, through those leveraging relationships and also confidence building measures as well. And then where do you need to proliferate friendlies, because America can't be everywhere all the time. We're also seeing that even with there's been a debate about whether or not the NATO head sort of commander should be US, because currently it's US because US provides that extended nuclear deterrence, but in future will that go to a EU commander, and then they're responsible for those weapons? But that may change those dynamics of the role that France and UK play in there, and I think Australia may need to think of that, and that might play into sort of David Phillips's logic around where would an Indo-Pacific NATO headquarters lie, and what would that look like.
And I think it will be accurate to say that the acquiring a nuclear weapons, since the terms of the nuclear weapons is a serious business, it can trigger the fear of neighboring countries. I think similar things happened to Australia when they announced the AUKUS. It takes some attention from the New Zealand and from Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia. And I think it's valid for Australia as well, because it's a serious weapon. How do you see when the Australia? Do you see that this problem is solved, or still this fear is existing among the Australian countries when it acquiring AUKUS nuclear submarine?
Not so much the submarines, the nuclear weapons thing, but we need to get to a point where the UK is. Like, the UK's done this for a long time, and basically when they announced that AUKUS was happening and the changes and the review, everyone's like, sure, keep calm and carry on. Like, it's not a big deal. We've had nuclear powered submarines for a long time. We've had nuclear weapons for a long time, and they've been safe and effective. Australia needs to get to that stage. We have a nuclear industry. I live not far from it. It's safe. We haven't had any issues. And we need to talk to our people about why we have a why we need extended nuclear deterrence from America, and then also why we may have to look at whether hosting those or with them. But we have the bombers come here from the US, and they're under that guise of don't ask, don't tell. So they may or may not have nuclear weapons on them. And no one really blinks an eyelid when they rock up here anyway. I mean, maybe it's only people who are avidly watching them that even know. But yeah, I think we can get around that problem. I think we put up too many barriers to that without really going, look, how do we get around this problem and why we might need to really think about that in the future. The other thing is like, you bring up a good point about the other countries in the region. Like, so for example, Australia is, making more bilateral arrangements with countries around our region. So we've just had the Papua New Guinea agreement, and I can't remember if the Vanuatu one went through yet, but that's a conventional sort of deterrence, and we're going to face a problem when you're facing a nuclear armed adversary. If you only have conventional weapons against them, they're going to be able to coerce you. Like, the whole idea of the nuclear weapons is to deter a large-scale conflict or a nuclear strike. And we've had the joint facilities here, so we risk like a nuclear strike. We've had the risk of that since the Cold War. China actively threatened us with they built out conventional strikes in 2021. They said, well, yeah, we've got a problem with you. Now we're going to build out our conventional weapons. And people have sort of been thinking, oh, we're only going to cop some conventional strikes. That's okay. We'll kind of wear them. But I think we need to be thinking about our joint facilities, how they feed into the NC3 capabilities of the US, and then what does that mean? How high up are they on the target list? They were quite high in the Russian ones from the public papers that are available that Paul Dibbs has written. And we need to be thinking about what does that look like, and how our newfound allies feel about nuclear weapons on capabilities. Will they feel more safe or not? And then, how do they then play into those existing bilateral relationships and multilateral relationships, and maybe eventually form some kind of alliance as well.
Especially in AUKUS case, I think it is important to distinguish between the nuclear powered submarine and nuclear armed submarine. Yeah, this is also important. When sometimes the people who are not familiar with the topics, they may believe that these are nuclear power or nuclear armed submarine. But,
yes. So the Australian ones are going to be nuclear powered, not nuclear armed. But the thing is that if we already depend on US extended nuclear deterrence, and we have, say, nuclear bombers that come here, what difference is it really when we get submarines here on our shore with nuclear weapons potentially as well, providing that extended nuclear deterrence? And that's something people are stuck on, and it shouldn't be. It should just be like, don't ask, don't tell. We may not have nuclear weapons. And Trump has shown the importance of these types of capabilities like actively lately. I mean, he sold me the submarines. I mean, he could sell anyone a submarine, I reckon. He using the submarines, like when Russia threatened to nuclear weapons, he said, well, I've got nuclear submarines in the region. And when China circumnavigated Australia, there was an Ohio class submarine here, and they're nuclear weapons capable. So we need to sort of really think about that. this is already happening, and it's happened for many years in the past. We've had nuclear powered aircraft carriers on our shores. We've had it's not new.
Yes, at least at the end of the day, even the nuclear powered submarine with the conventional missile will put another layer into the Australian deterrence.
Yes,
this
but
is
it's hard to like if you fire a conventional weapon in a nuclear armed country, and they say, well, we'll nuke you, would you fire it in the first place? That's the problem that we face. So, I mean, we may not even be able to put forces at risk. Like, you can't really put a nuclear armed adversary at risk. So the reason why they're forming these alliances currently with the ones close to our region is because when the Chinese circumnavigated, you can potentially prevent them from coming down here in the first place. But once they're already past here, what are you going to do? Like, because they may just be down here for another exercise, and then live fire. But what happens if they come down and cut submarine cables or fire a weapon at our joint facilities, and we have no options? I mean, we'd want nuclear deterrence in that stage then to be like, well, hang on a minute, we've got nukes, so you might want to think twice about doing that in the first place. Because if we just conventional's just not going to cut it with that, I don't think.
Yeah, when you mentioned the Chinese ships circumnavigating Australia, and after the AUKUS, and Australia also will be able to circumnavigating maybe Taiwan Strait, or with the Virginia class submarine into the South China Sea. It will also be another kind of the reverse effect of the Chinese policy.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I say that the Australia after the AUKUS, Australia also will be able to moving its submarine in case of the crisis, in time of crisis, into the South China Sea or the wider Pacific region to increase its deterrence capabilities.
Yeah, Australia's deterrence or Australia's defence policy is sort of looking at that defence of Australia piece. So what does that look like in our region, and how would we posture our forces in that region to support that?
And also, I think facilitate the coordination between the US allies in the region for Australia to more communicate or coordinate with Japan, with South Korea through the submarines.
True. Yeah, so if you've got those intelligence sharing arrangements, you could probably be more powerful as well, or you're likely to be more powerful in that sense. So they're very valuable relationships to have, and we should nurture those as well.
And lastly, Natalie, do you think will there be any friction, or do you see any friction between the New Zealand and Australia, especially through the free nuclear arms zone, or
no? So
acquired the nuclear powered submarine.
Recently, when the Chinese came through, they've also been doing activities around the New Zealand Cook Islands, whether that's for seabed mining or whatever. But I think the New Zealanders come out openly saying this, that it's kind of putting them on edge. They're now investing in, I don't know the numbers, but I know that they're increasing their defence spending, and that they're investing in new capabilities, and sort of looking at what does that gap out there on the East Coast look like between sort of coming down from China to sort of New Zealand again, and what capabilities would be best there. So, do you need P8s or whatever, like anti-submarine warfare? What sorts of things do you need? And yeah, I think they're thinking more about their security, whether or not they'll go back to having allowing nuclear bombers to land on their territory, or for us to park our submarines in their backyard, or for the US to do that, is a question that needs to be answered as well. And I think those conversations could be beneficial.
And do you think which regional countries has more potential to join the AUKUS in the future?
I think it will stay between Australia, UK and US at the moment. It will be interesting to see what will happen with the South Korean submarines and how that plays into it. But because of the intelligence sharing arrangements already, the Five Eyes, and the strong ties between US, UK and Australia, I see that being quite close-knit. However, that's not to say that other
I think Japan. Do you think that Japan has more potential to join? And even some observers calling AUKUS, Japan, Australia.
I don't think it'll become AUKUS. I think if anything happens, it will be a different. It'll either be an extension of existing bilateral relationships, and we're seeing those bilateral relationships strengthen. But then we're also seeing those relationships between those parties sort of crossover as well. So they are sort of coming from that, sort of hub and spoke model to that sort of more meshed network. And through that, which ones will then form an alliance? If countries are worried about getting caught up on a Taiwan contingency. The whole idea is to prevent that from the first place, but that's where you might want to look at beyond Taiwan contingency, as in China just more broadly, and working with other their sort of relationships with Russia, North Korea and Iran, and what's needed then to deter that bigger picture, and how should these countries come together, and is that more likely to deter as well?
Okay, just rephrase my questions. Do you think that the AUKUS agreement is mostly related to Australia's national security needs, or it's linked to its threat perception, or in broadly it's a part of the US relations with the Taiwan and with the China? In that case, so how do you see it will affect the Australia's Taiwan policy or Australia's China relations in the future?
So it came about after China had threatened Australia when we questioned the origins of COVID, and we got a lot of sanctions, and we got the verbal threats, which were publicly made on TV. We got the 14 grievances, I think it was, and then we also in 2021 they said that basically they'd threaten us with conventional weapons and that they were going to build them out, and that probably got people thinking. I think it's also very much about the US submarine base and the UK submarine base, and I've talked about this on a podcast before, because back in, I think it was in the early 2000s, Rand had written some articles for the UK Ministry of Defence, and they'd said, look, you've got a submarine building capacity issue, you can't build them alone, you need to find some allies to do that with you. And nothing happened until AUKUS. And the US has also had its challenges, and I think it's come to the point of like, well, how are we going to do this better? And the timing was right, and then it was about strengthening those bonds to show a more united front to China as well.
The AUKUS just came after the announcement of the quadrilateral security dialogue between India, China, and Australia. From one perspective, do you believe that the US and its allies sees the Quad is not enough to deter China, then they moving toward another deterrence frameworks like AUKUS?
Well, I don't think so. My view of AUKUS is that it probably wasn't created to, as in, there's a deterrence aspect which even our Deputy Prime Minister sort of ignored as well. So the deterrence aspect of that is when we have the rotational UK and US forces, and this is where I'm saying, should they include the slicker men on them? And I think they should. that would provide a deterrence effect. The UK has interests as well in the Indian Ocean region too, so it would be of benefit. Like when we were preparing for one of the exercises, Elbridge Colby said, "Why are you sending an aircraft carrier down there, UK? It's not required, apparently." But they have interests here in the Indian Ocean region and Australia, I mean, let alone the Commonwealth. But if it is, I don't think it was designed to be a response, like it was a more broader deterrence piece, a more would you call that general deterrence?
The AUKUS seems to more local to the Australia, but the difference here is I think United Kingdom, and in the pattern, when we combine the pattern of the AUKUS and the Quad, I think difference is only Japan and the United Kingdom. In the Quad, there is Australia, India, Japan, and United States, and here is a 3-2 versus 4 countries. But that still they are the like-minded countries and similar to Australia, mainly based on although they mentioned in the paper, for example, I mentioned earlier, the Japan's late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said he conceptualized the two Pacific, Indian Pacific and Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean, and in order to protect freedom of navigation and prosperous Pacific region.
Yeah.
But the AUKUS is mostly seems to related link it to Australian national security, even maybe the US interest in the Pacific region, because the China also over the last decade significantly increased its power projection capability into the Pacific region. Even as you say, they circumnavigate in the Australia and also develop some bilateral relations with the Pacific countries like the Solomon Islands and Tuvalu and others maybe. Yes, of course, all these things they push the United States maybe main guarantor of its allies in East Asia. And lastly, just since we run out of the time, how we can combine all these patterns, or do you think that in the future US will be able to continue to support its allies, to protect its allies as a security guarantor, when the experts talking about the multipolar world order, and especially in technical level, when the United States in a relative decline in its power in shipbuilding, maybe in the run out of the missile arsenal, especially at the recent Iran-Israel war. United States significantly support to the Israel, and it has some stockpile issues. And on the other hand, North Korea, like they send troops to Ukraine, and all this combination of this new world order, let's say new world order, or we are maybe at the beginning of the multipolar world order, or we are already in, we don't know. We think that the United States will be able, or its allies will be able to continue to protect this interest versus their enemies or rivals?
I think countries, and it comes down to the shared threat, the shared values, and those trade-offs. And I think the US is starting to see, well, Trump sort of initially maybe didn't, like, he tends to be a test and adjust kind of person. And I think he's seeing now the value of allies and partners in those relationships and being able to, so, so in some ways he's stepping back and saying you need to do more of the burden sharing, but he's also like, well, I think it's that realization of, well, America can't produce everything either. So Europe is going to have to come up and produce its capabilities as well. And I think also Europe's realizing that. And that will be the same in the Indo-Pacific as well. I mean, we're even going to see that I think we're even going to see that in the energy market, because Trump's basically promising nuclear energy for anyone under his executive orders. But he is going to face a capacity problem at some point if he doesn't have allies and partners building these reactors. Because if the Saudis go to him and say, we want a nuclear reactor, he's going to face a capacity problem at some point when everyone's wanting just that from the US. So I think the US will find challenges providing everything for everyone. You know, where do they step back from some of these roles? Where do they take the lead on others? Where in the short term, we really can't afford for them to step back because other countries don't have these nuclear forces. So countries like Australia, Japan, and South Korea, for example, are, you know, we're dependent upon that now, and we're going to need that in the short term. This is where the US could look at which point does it friendly proliferate? Does it need to create regional structures that can provide deterrence, including nuclear deterrence? But also where the US might have a role. So even with the with the Pakistan and Saudi Arabia relationship, they've gone in there wanting an alliance, and that hasn't yet happened. But there's talk from, say, Chinese think tankers saying, well, China should fill this gap and go in there with the Saudis and Pakistanis. Now, whether or not they want that, I don't know. But where may the US still need to be actively engaged? And I think it's probably going to need to be actively engaged throughout a lot of the different areas. How much of that into the future and how long for, that's a very big question. But for at least the short, you know, term, 10, 15 years, I'd say yes, until that dynamics changes. And we'll probably see some of those changes happen as countries react to China's nuclear weapons build up.
Yes, Natalie, we just come to the end of our shows. Thank you very much for these wonderful insights from the region and about the deterrence, nuclear weapons, AUKUS, to provide my audiences.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me a voice. I feel like the mermaid that's come out of the sea and I'm finally on land with a voice.
Yeah, it is wonderful to discussing on such topics. And also thank you for my audiences who are with us until the end of the shows. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and see you on the next show.